Thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, really looking forward to this panel. We're going to do some introductions of ourselves, but we're really going to try to into some really interesting questions. So I'm really looking forward to this. We've had a couple of times to kind of talk with each other about the topic. So I'm Larry Boyd. I'm actually a professor of practice here at Clemson. I run the Master of Engineering program in biomedical engineering. I've been involved in the program for many years. This is my second year now running the program. I'm a double Clemson grad, undergrad in mechanical engineering, master's in biomedical engineering. From Clemson, I moved out into the medical device business in Memphis, Tennessee. So I was there for almost 10 years in R&D, moved up into some leadership roles. Ultimately, the company that I worked with last was a spine implant company. They did orthopedic spinal implants, one of the first in that area. And I started working with recombinant proteins and human tissues, and I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm like used to making stuff out of metal and other hard things like that. And I was getting involved in the cell side. Company was doing pretty well. Medtronic bought us. And so for me, that was a chance to step away and kind of pivot into more education. So I went to Duke, did a PhD in biomedical engineering, really on the cell and tissue engineering side of things, genetics, genomics, worked with an animal model of disc degeneration, mice that had a knockout in particular collagen. Had a great time there working, 7 years in the lab. Did do some work with outside companies, so got to kind of get familiar with the startup world coming through Duke. When I finished, I stayed on for 3 years teaching. We built an incubator there called DoHatch. Really had a great time working with students, working with student entrepreneurs, so this is kind of near and dear to my heart. Also started a couple of medical device companies in the Research Triangle Park. BioShape Solutions and View Medical, so lighting company, local drug delivery company. And then ultimately kind of stepped out back into industry again. Said, I'm going to come back to academia, but I want to get back into the industry side, the medical device side. So I worked in Atlanta for a couple of years with a spine company there. And then ultimately wound up back in the RTP working for a device company called BioVenus. They'd spun out of a big medical device company called Smith & Nephew. And then my last job there actually was with a startup that came out of Duke that was in 3D printing, orthopedic 3D printing, personalized medicine, did that for about a year. And as that kind of wound down through some financial considerations at the company, had a chance to come back here and direct the Master of Engineering program. It's a very project-based program, so our students, hopefully some of them, if they're not here, they'll come later. I know we've got one of our main classes this morning, so hopefully they'll be here a little bit later. But they get to work on very, very tangible projects that are really kind of the core of the curriculum. I'll tell you, one of the projects that we worked on is actually a business that I'm working with the co-founder to start around an exoskeleton for paraplegic patients that have use of their upper limbs. They can actually use their arms to move around, to exercise, to be upright, to have mobility as well as therapeutic activity called Exosolutions. So that's really been a cool kind of full circle. Actually taught my first class on Monday in Riggs Hall, and I haven't been in that building since I was an undergraduate mechanical engineering student. And you know, this theme of us folks coming back to Clemson, right, supporting Clemson, they say there's something in these hills. So anyway, my quick introduction, I'm gonna let Paul and Matt introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some questions.
Great, thank you, Dr. Boyd. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Capriolo. I am a lifelong entrepreneur and excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I started my first company in grad school at Carnegie Mellon with a computer science background with a few friends and never looked back. So I've started probably a dozen companies, probably 10 were failures, but great lessons, and two were successes. The first company that was a success, I was working on a game platform for the Nintendo Wii at the time, and then Facebook launched its app marketplace or app platform, and we ended up building the second largest Facebook app at the time, which was raising money for Susan G. Komen, and we were acquired by a loyalty platform, which is now called Rakuten Loyalty, if anyone's familiar with Rakuten. And I took what I learned in the loyalty space and applied that to the social gaming space, Facebook games, and then iPhone and Android games, where we built a monetization platform that powered tens of thousands of games, covering about 300 million users a month. The quick backstory is, if you play games on your phone, about 3% of people pay for those games. buying in-game items and things like that, 97% of people do not pay. So how do you monetize the other 97%? We came up with a novel solution that we applied from our learnings in the loyalty space, and had a great exit there. We even had some angels that were Clemson faculty and alums, so that was really exciting. And my tie to Clemson. After that, I semi-retired, but worked at different friends' startups and helped them, and then I had the opportunity to start and operate a venture studio in Saudi Arabia on behalf of NEOM, which is a cognitive city being built in the east of Saudi Arabia along the sea. And it's a very big, it's mostly construction, but they also have, to support the construction, a lot of different sectors and initiatives that they're working on across health and clean food and agriculture. And I had the pleasure to found or build alongside a small founding team many deep tech startups in food science, in KYC blockchain, in satellites and Earth observation, and in nanomedicine. The food science company is our first exit. We exited this week. It's called Agilitas. It's a food formulation company, which I was really excited about. So we're starting to see some wins and fruits of our labor there. But I left NEOM along with, in my opinion, 3 of the best folks that were there this year to get back on the wagon and start my own startup again. So I'm currently Chief Engineering Officer and co-founder of a company called Retta. Retta is the first product that founders need, and we believe that everyone has a startup in them, and Retta helps them unlock that. So when I worked at NEOM, we ran business competitions with the Public Investment Fund, PIF, and we would get thousands and thousands of companies across the world applying to work with us. And we could only work with 5 to 10 at a time. And a lot of great companies didn't get the support that they needed. So we are building basically an AI version of our venture team that acts as a mentor, an operator, and an expert. It's a voice-first AI that you as a founder talk to, and it works alongside you to help you grow your business and stay on track. So that's a little bit about me. When I'm not building my own businesses, I am mentoring at University of Maryland. I've been an EIR at the Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship for about 10 years, mentoring hundreds of different students, alumni, and faculty on their business ideas and lecturing. And I also teach an MBA entrepreneurship program at a London-based university called One Day. A little bit about me. Excited to answer some questions.
Thanks, Paul. My name is Matt Cupelli. I am a Clemson biomedical engineering grad from 2011 and then again in 12. I've been a design mentor and a friend of the program since I graduated, pretty much for about a decade. And so it's been fun to work with Dr. Boyd and some of the other professors on a lot of the design projects and things like that over the years. As far as my career, I work, I'm a vice president of operations at a company called North American Rescue. We make medical devices for the military and first responders and things like that. So life-saving medical devices that you would see in the back of an ambulance or in a military medic's aid bag, things like that they would use, right there at the point of wounding or on the battlefield. I've also had over the last several months, the honor of working with actually one of the teams that spun out of the Clemson Biomedical Engineering Master's program. It was they had an idea for a novel surgical retractor, and they went to go start to get some grant funding and stuff like that. And some of their advice they got, they said, hey, you guys need to find a CEO. You guys need to find someone who can really help you understand the business and the landscape and bring this good idea, and actually make it more than just a good idea or an academic project. So they got in touch with me. I signed on, and so I've been their CEO for several months now. And we're working towards commercializing that product. Not quite there yet, but we've got some good momentum and are looking to get to some clinical trials before the end of the year. And I think that's it for now. I'll leave more time for questions.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And we appreciate all your help for sure. And just to the audience, I mean, we're always looking for entrepreneurs that are willing to come alongside us. We have some really promising projects that come out of our program. So if you want to take a look at them, get in touch with me. There might be something you'll find interesting and can help us out with. Really some great questions. So let's start out at the beginning. Like, how do you know if this idea is worth pursuing? Like, what's your first sort of screen that you put something through where you determine, should I do this? Is there potential? Like, what are your first questions?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe the most important question is, Paul and I were on the phone the other day. We were like, we both ask "so what" a lot, right? Like that's the question we ask a lot. You know, something has to be, obviously it's got to be a good idea, but then, all right, so what, right? Is it just something that's a good idea? Is it a hammer just looking for a nail, and anywhere it can find it, I'm going to try to find an application to try to force it into? I think you have to ask yourself, you know, does anyone need this product? Is there a customer out there that I'm actually solving a real pain point? There's so many things that go into the business model. Do I have a product that there's already an established market and incumbent for that I would have to displace? Is my thing so much better than that I'm going to make this decision to change? You know, just a no-brainer. You know, is the customer going to be willing to pay for this? If it's a new capability that they've gotten so used to, you know, doing things the way they always have, are they willing to pay for it? There's so many parts of the business model that have to kind of work together in harmony. That it's just so much more than just it's a good idea. Oh, it's cool. I like it. I talked to this person. They said they love it. There has to be a customer who's willing to buy it.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Matt said. So I'm just going to add a couple plus ones here. The first two questions that I always try and answer when I start a venture or I'm working with a venture is who matters most and what matters most. And another way to say that is, you know, what is the acute pain that you're solving and for who? And if they're already paying if they're already paying to solve it, that's a good sign that it's even, you know, it's a real pain. So I always start my ventures by doing basically investigative work, customer discovery, we call it. So in the food science company that was just acquired this week, Agilitas, I talked to probably 200 different people. I talked to innovation managers and brand managers and R&D and food scientists and leaders, and you need to understand the ecosystem and kind of where the root cause is. And I really, you know, tried to dig down and understand what is the problem and who's having the problem and what is the impact that a solution can make. So those are kind of the two big questions. And then beyond that, there's a question of like, why you? What is the founder fit? The founder market fit? Does the founder have some expertise or some differentiator that makes them kind of the right person to start that?
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so this summer we spent a lot of time on voice of customer with this Exo Solutions, right? Talking to clinicians, talking to people who are in the business, like, does our business model make sense? There's a lot of unique risks and considerations to life science businesses. You want to talk about that a little bit? Like, I know, Matt, you and I have talked a lot about like FDA. How are you going to get this approved? Reimbursement. How are you going to get it paid for? You're adding cost to a surgical procedure. So how are you going to justify that? I mean, as a life science business, there's some additional risks that we have to think about. And I'm curious kind of in your businesses, how you would sort of address some of those other risks specific to the industry, like food science even. You have other risks that are just endemic to that particular type of business.
Yeah, I've worked with a handful of life science companies, so I'll share a couple examples. One I'm currently working with is called Printimed. We create artificial spider silk. The original idea was for medical use, for wound dressings and heart valves. It's a better mousetrap, and the FDA approval and the feedback cycles are so long in medical, and I am a very impatient entrepreneur that we have not pivoted, but we've kind of reprioritized non-medical uses like cosmetics and some other things. So one of the things that frustrates me, and Matt and I were talking about this, is the long feedback loops. When I try and start a company, I try and create the tightest feedback loop possible, where you can take action, create data, draw insights from that data, and then ultimately have those insights dictate your next action. So if you have to wait months or years to go through a trial, it can be really frustrating, and it can feel, for me at least, like I'm sitting on my hands and there's not a lot to do. One company that I felt that frustration with was one I was working with through NEOM, called Nanopalm, which is doing curing genetic diseases through in vivo outpatient. They basically building a different version of LMPs that hold different sizes payloads, and they can be built in different structures to attach to different cells and organs. We have a clinical trial for a cure for sickle cell disease right now, and there's a bunch of cures in our pipeline. But it's so frustrating. Like, you talk to the FDA, you talk to investors. It's a much riskier venture usually, because it can be binary. Like, it either passes the trials or it doesn't. So those are some of the things that are unique challenges to life science.
Yeah, I think, well, Woody showed one of the major risks with that timeline on one of those slides is, you could be 10 years into a project and it's going to fall out, right? I think there's a lot of risks inherent to life sciences. One of the ones I've seen a lot is the people who have the most investment in your solution or your product or whatever don't actually have the decision-making power, right? So insurance has got to buy into what you're doing. It's not just the surgeon wants it, it's the best thing for the patient, everybody agrees on that. It doesn't really matter if insurance doesn't cover it. So I think there's always a risk, and just, you got to understand that whole spectrum of, the stakeholders. And yeah, I mean, there are several other risks, but I'd say, in terms of the business model, being able to have that viable, path to having a payer is an important one I've seen a lot. Absolutely. And I think that you kind of made the point, and Paul certainly made it earlier. Is it going to teach us something? I think you have to understand the difference between a one-way door and a two-way door as you're making decisions, right? Like, Google's famous for A/B testing, right? They can change their algorithm or their code, and then within a couple days get data back on the impact of that change. That's a two-way door. They don't like the impact, they strip it right out. In medical devices and life sciences and stuff like that, you don't have that luxury all the time, right? You walk through some one-way doors, there's no going back. And so I think that difference in that, having that context and understanding of those risks, of those, if you're walking through a one-way door, you've got to be darn sure that it's the right move. But that risk assessment is happening constantly. Absolutely.
One of the unique aspects maybe of medical devices versus pharma is there's different classifications of approval, right? So there's a class 1, class 2, class 3. You can get a product approved via class 2 without any clinical evidence, right? You just do comparative testing, but you need that clinical evidence for the payers. And so trying to build that in, that it costs money, and you don't have to do it, but you better do it. And if you want to get it into a hospital, they will ask you, where's your clinical evidence? Class 3, you get into that, you're almost a drug. I mean, you are 7, 8 years out, $30-40 million. So it just depends on the risk. That's how the FDA looks at it. Maybe that's a good segue to kind of what we had next to talk about was, so what are some of the misconceptions about entrepreneurship that people have, and maybe just around kind of the viewpoint that entrepreneurs have of risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them, I mean, there's probably some misconceptions that are positive and some that are negative. I think one is that, I mean, I think people are so afraid of being an entrepreneur because of the, kind of the inherent risks. But I think, one of the things that I've learned and I've seen is there's so much support in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, in an innovation ecosystem. I mean, things like this. I live in Greenville. There are several different, support resources, incubators, different organizations in the area that support entrepreneurs and first-time small business owners and things like that. So I think, I mean, there is absolutely risk, but there's a lot that you can do as an entrepreneur to de-risk things early on and have resources to support you. And even like Retta, you now you may have access to an on-demand mentor that is accessible and readily available for you.
I love risk. I do. I love talking about it. It sounds weird coming out of my mouth like that. Uh, the way that I think about ventures and the way we talk about ventures, we have the saying is that ventures are risk reduction factories. So you take on some risk and then you work to reduce the risk. And Peter Drucker says there's no profit without risk, which is something that I internalize. If you are a mature entrepreneur, I think you can run at least through Series A, and life sciences has some unique IP issues, but basically off of a risks and assumptions experiment loop, which is my favorite thing to do, which is like what are the things that can kill the business, and how important is it, and how confident am I in those things? And you can think about it like a to-do list, and I just pick through it. Who matters most and what matters most, those are usually the two biggest risks. What problem am I solving and who am I solving it for? The next big chunk of risk is, okay, well, how am I solving that problem? And then what is the business around it? But there's a lot of things under there, like, is the technology feasible? And every startup has its own different set of risks. One of the big risks that beyond that is the founder risk. Founder blind spots or founder hubris or founder ego. And a lot of times in life sciences, specifically, a risk that I see is that the founders of these great companies, especially if they're spun out of university, they just want to work on the technology. And they think the business is kind of an afterthought. But in reality, the best mousetrap doesn't always win. It has a lot to do with storytelling and fundraising and some of these intangibles. And so, the founder risk is great. And that's one of the things we always try and help those types of founders with, is bringing on the right people that can complement them. And if they just want to work on the technology, how do we kind of create a role for them that allows them to do that? But really, yeah, it's all about reducing risk. And another thing that's just coming to mind is when you talk to customers, how you talk to them will add or subtract risk from your venture. For instance, if you go up to someone and say, like your mom, and say, hey, do you like this product I'm working on? She's going to say, yes, sweetie, this is great. I would definitely buy it. And that's a false signal. And that false signal creates risk. But if you ask it in a different way, like, what are your challenges with this? Or what have you done to try and solve this pain? And you're getting a more non-biased response, then you can use that to reduce risk further.
A great lead in, Woody, to kind of our next question, which was, as an entrepreneur, like, what skills did you feel like you had to develop, like new skills, versus what skills did you look to outside experts for? And how do you identify those folks, right? I mean, I think for me, one of the key traits of an entrepreneur is they're an inherent networker. They're a natural networker. They make connections, and they're sincere connections, right? And they also want to help other people. But from my perspective, I think if you reach out to another entrepreneur with a question, they'll answer you usually. They'll help you. I mean, so, what do you determine, like, hey, this is something I've got to get better at, versus, you know what, I think there's other folks I can turn to that can help fill that knowledge gap?
Yeah, that's a great one. I didn't take any business classes in undergrad or grad. I was pure science and math. And when I started my first company, I started with 2 other computer science graduates, and we got to the point where we said, okay, who wants to be the CEO? Like, it was some burden, and I'll do it. And kind of, I never looked back. What I loved about the business side is you could solve problems, and the problems were bigger and they were harder than they were in computer science. And they weren't as binary. They're non-deterministic. You could do okay or great, and there's all these different shades of it. And what's ironic is now I teach MBA in entrepreneurship. So got them, I guess. I'm going to pass it to you, Matt.
Yeah, I think the finding the right team and the right folks to surround yourself with, understanding your strengths and weaknesses is critical. Actually, I saw one of our speakers from this afternoon, Dick Pace, earlier. He was in the middle of a conversation and he was like, "Hey, I'm going to make a shameless plug here. I'm going to go ahead and sell myself, sell my services, right there on the spot." And I have a good friend who's a financial advisor. He said, "I've gotten more clients pumping gas at the gas station because there's always somebody there with nothing to do. They're standing right there. I go walk up, I talk to them, I say, 'Hey, who do you use for your financial services?'" So I think certainly as an entrepreneur, you have to always be ready and willing to share your story. Talk about what you've got. Maybe you don't want to always have the most captive kind of customer audience, but to your point earlier, you start a lot of times these ideas come from a technical person, right? Somebody who loves the research, loves the science, loves the engineering. And there's so much more to it than that. There's the regulatory piece in life sciences. You got to find a good maybe a legal partner to help you navigate through legal things. Somebody with some financial acumen. Some of these skills you can develop yourself, but you have to understand. I think you can't be all things to all people. It's too much for one person to bear the burden. And you got to surround yourself with a team that can really support you and supplement areas where you're maybe not quite as strong. I think marketing is another one. Some people are really gifted in that way, and I think again it's just there are some skills you can learn and develop, but there's a lot that you have to supplement. In the project I'm working on that came out of Clemson, there's a handful of students that were did that project during their academic studies, and it's been interesting to see the dynamics there because there's very clearly, if you guys, I think your students here, you've been on team projects before, you know how they go, right? Not everyone, it's not a equal distribution of work across the team project, and I've seen that now in the postgraduate work as well. But they all want to be treated equally. They all want to be treated as co-founders and as equal equity partners in this. I'm like, it's just not how it is, right? We each have a different role to play in this enterprise if we're going to move forward. We each have something to offer. We each have a piece of value, but there are discrepancies there. And I'm not going to. You cannot take an academic team project mindset into a business. It just doesn't work. So you have to be able to acknowledge your strengths, weaknesses, and the value that you can provide to the team, and that's something I've had to have those kind of difficult conversations lately. It's not been that fun, but it's necessary.
Those equity questions are interesting, right? When you start to put together a cap table and how much ownership do you get, those are hard questions because it's not an equal division like a project. All right, last question area that we talked about. Like, when do you know when should you pivot, right? I mean, you're going to run into hard problems. The business is going to hit a certain point. What point does persistence become obstinance? And like, how do you handle that sort of challenges, right? And stick-to-itiveness versus maybe taking a different approach?
Yeah, I think that's a great question we will all be faced with, whether it's in business, life, in any way, shape, or form, maybe even through academics. How do you pivot to pick a different major or stay in what you've got? I think and I would like to think engineers would be maybe better at this, but I'm not sure we actually are. But getting information to help you make an informed decision. Like we were talking about before, gathering evidence, using that, that feedback loop of evidence to say, okay, this is working. I'm moving in the direction I want to go. But to be able to make that decision, you have to kind of know where you're going first, right? So, but you have to have the vision, and you have to be able to be gathering evidence and using it to identify where you are, not emotionally and not irrationally, but understanding, okay, what is working, what is not. But it's got to be evidence based, and I think that's where, to Woody's point earlier, you have to have people around you who are going to ask you those difficult questions and who are going to say, hey, over the last 6 months, we've accomplished this. What does that mean for us? does that mean we're on the right track and in the next 6 months we're going to get where we want to go? Or does that mean that this did not go how we necessarily thought? What do we do here, right? Sometimes it's easier to just kind of stick your head in the sand and say, like, I'm just going to pray it all away and hope for the best, right? But when you're confronted with information, you have to digest that information and use it to make a good decision.
I'm going to kind of break down pivots to small pivots and big pivots, and then I'll address both. I think about startups as constantly doing small pivots. So it's slightly adjusting the problem you're solving, slightly adjusting who you're solving it for, who the champions and the buyers are. How does the solution work? How does the pricing work? So I think it's a constant cycle of pivoting in some sense, building a business. And for Retta, we've pivoted probably 3 times in the first 6 months. We went from running VC funnels, so they're basically managing their intake with our voice AI and automating investment memos to see, and then when you take action and you draw insights, you can see the next step. And you said you don't need to see the whole chessboard. Totally agree. So you just need to take actions and generate insights. And our thinking has grown and leveled up so much just in the last 6 months to what it is now. And I'm sure we'll pivot another 3 times in the following 6 months. But when do you do a bigger pivot? I've done bigger pivots mostly when I find something that's more interesting to work on, and that usually happens through customer discovery and customer development. For instance, we went with SARSAT, the satellite company that I've worked on. They came in thinking that they were going to launch a bunch of satellites and monitor oil spills and catch all of these oil tankers that are not properly cleaning the tankers and dumping oil into the ocean. And we interviewed dozens and dozens of folks that were in the oil spill response team, and private and public, and they didn't have a problem. They got it under control. The oil spills do not happen anymore, and even kind of the small ones, they don't. So it was dead. So what did we do? We had to pivot. And this was a bit of a technology, because these guys were satellite experts. Like, we weren't going to get off satellites. But what was the use case, and so, which obviously dictated what sensors do you put on the satellites and the rotations and so much. Like, is it SAR, or is it optical, or whatever? So I ended up building basically a prototype where we thought of who needs data from space. All the people you could think of, insurers, or people fighting wildfires, or monitoring CO2 in the atmosphere, a million other things. And we gave them I built this tool, and we gave it to them and just said, just ask anything about the Earth that you want. It's like a ChatGPT prompt. Just type in anything about the Earth. And we gave it to environmentalists and all these stakeholders. And we saw that, especially in the Middle East, they are developing these very mountainous and densely populated, not dense, dense regions in the Middle East, and they couldn't do land surveying properly. It cost them millions of dollars and took months just to do surveying in some of these regions like Alula and around Neom. And we said, hell, this is something we can do. And we can be, if we put the right sensors on these satellites, we could be, within a few centimeters of accuracy. So we're not quite as accurate as the guys on the ground with the LiDAR, but for the purposes of certainly doing the first few phases of development and assessment, we could cut down something that takes 3 months and a team of people to a few seconds. And we pivoted the whole company. And then we were starting to do land surveying and topography, and building on top of that, what are all the other things that people need to survey? Where are the water sources? How does the water flow? And where, if it rains, where will the flooding happen, especially in a dry desert area? So that's one hard pivot. And And it's really just about, if you find a more acute problem, if you find something that the customer cares more deeply about it and it has more of a pain around it, and they want to solve it more, and they are willing to pay for it more, then that's where you go. You kind of you're a hound dog following the lead, and you want to solve the biggest problem for the biggest market. So that's how I think about pivots.
Yeah, great. And I like your point, Paul. I mean, you're pivoting for a better opportunity or a better problem, right? Like this summer, we're very focused on the product being in the home, right? Paraplegic patient, mobility, having the ability to move the legs, be upright. But we pivoted to a starting point in the clinic because we heard that from a number of executives in the area, the rehab area, but also people who are in the clinic. Start there. There's a real benefit. We're going to learn from it. We can sell it to the clinics. Then we can deal with the problem that we're going to have selling into the home, right? And getting reimbursement and all those things for durable. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was just a better opportunity. And we heard from a couple of folks, and that kind of reinforced it. I'll put in a pitch for if you use these note-taking apps that a lot of people use. I've been using it in a lot of my interviews with folks, and they're usually, nobody's told me to turn it off yet. They're super helpful, and I go back through and work through them multiple times to kind of recap what we learned. And I've also used them for some, like, with approval, testimonial in terms of what a client has said about the potential product. So anyway, are we okay? Okay. So just the last bit. So we were going to wrap with like what's one key of advice that you would give to students? And I'll start, and you've heard it probably a bunch of times already. Like, build your network, right? You're here, you come to events like this. When I was at Duke, I had come out of decade in industry, and I would tell my other grad students, like, go to these things, go to Fuqua and hear the president of J&J talk and talk to people, and just get out there and network and make those connections. LinkedIn is a great tool. Find us on LinkedIn, connect with us on LinkedIn. I'll connect with anybody that's a Clemson alum. Even if I haven't met you, we'll connect. So networking is kind of my big one, but I know you guys have some other thoughts.
Yeah, I think mine would be fall in love with the customer and the problem, and don't fall in love with the solution. The solution will change, but you really need to be passionate about the problem that you're solving. For instance, with Retta, I want to help entrepreneurs. My passion is to give every entrepreneur the best chance that they can to be successful. And to that end, if I'm working on something or plan on working on something that won't help an entrepreneur be successful, I want to know about that as soon as possible, right? And so I'm in love with the customer and the problem. I don't care how I'm solving it at the end of the day. It doesn't need, if it's not voice AI with a bunch of AI agents in the back end, fine. We'll figure out whatever it is, but I'm in love with the customer and the problem. So that's probably the one piece of advice I would give. If I could give a second piece of advice, sorry, Matt, just one more. It's to take action. Ultimately, you need data to know where to go and where to take a startup. And I see a lot of founders planning and thinking about it, and they think that's progress, but in reality, just pick a problem that pick a problem that you think you have some unique skills to solve, and just start there. Just start talking to people. And it will lead you to something that is valuable if you can if you make your way across stakeholders and ask them genuinely curious, open-ended questions about themselves and their problems. And you don't know where it will lead when you start, but eventually, if you keep going, you will find a problem that is valuable enough to work on, to build a business around, and that people will pay to solve.
Yeah, those are excellent. I would echo the focus on the customer and not the solution. I think, especially when it's very easy to just focus internally on, a feature or a part or a specific test or a result or something like that. But, I when I do my mentorship for the Clemson design teams, again, we always say, like, well, so what? How does that matter to the customer? How does that? The first slide I want to see every week or every month in our, like, stage gates for the design teams, like, what problem are we solving? Why does this matter? Why are we all here? If you're not, constantly kind of thinking with that in the back of your mind, and that is kind of underpinning all of your conversations and decisions. I think you've lost there, but I do want to kind of echo Woody's point as well, and kudos to you for having an environment and a culture that allows for that conversation. We've all been, well, I know I have been, I think most people have been in an environment where it's not always safe or acceptable to speak up and disagree with somebody in leadership, and to raise a counterpoint for something like that. And I'm in an environment like that right now, where there's one person who's just an absolute bulldog, and they won't listen to a counterpoint and won't have that discussion. So I think that's really important to foster that environment of trust, where a junior employee can say, "Hey, I got to ask you before I start carrying the flag for this decision that's being made. I need to understand it a little bit more." I think that's okay, right? And I think that's it's a healthy way to operate. You want to build a team that is all bought in, and I think culture is one of those important things. It's like, how do you describe it? I don't know, but I know it when I see it, right? And I think it's a very delicate thing that can really make or break you. But I think a culture of trust and honesty allows you to have those difficult conversations when you get feedback and you say, okay, let's just be honest with each other. Here's the information we've gotten recently. Do we want to pivot? Is there a better opportunity? Is there a different problem? What is our feedback? So I think that culture of honesty and transparency, if you're an entrepreneur, build it. If you're looking for a job, find it.
Yeah, great point. I think are we at break now? So thanks everybody. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.